call the meeting of the Town Center Community Center Advisory Committee on June 3rd at 1 p.m. And Gordon, do you want to do the roll call? Are you okay, or I'll do it?
I can do it, but I would suggest that just note that everyone is present.
Everyone is present.
Talk about perfect timing.
They're all present and accounted for. Perfect. Great. So we're going to offer this time for any member of the public. We're doing this a little differently than we did last time, just because we're kind of folding in a business meeting at the same time. So there's no members of the public present to have any comments. So I'll move on to item number 3, which is the approval of the minutes of our last 3 meetings. April 30th, May 13th, and May 29th. Do I have any comments from any members of the committee? Call for approval of the minutes.
I wasn't here for one of the meetings, so I'm not going to vote on that one.
Okay.
I move we approve the minutes.
Second, okay. So Rick made the motion and Phil approved. Dee was not here for one of the meetings, but the other one is under voting. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, so we've approved our minutes. So we're going to go to our regular agenda, which is the interviews of our firms of the Civic Center Master Plan. And we're then now going to turn it over to our guests, the members of LPA and associates.
Thank you very much. We are honored to be invited here to spend a few moments with you to talk about the next chapter of your quest here. We've read a lot. We have a lot of questions. Kudos to you for your persistence and carrying on through various twists and turns in the road. So we, over the next hour, are here to unveil our capabilities we feel that can help escort you to the next phase. We are candidly planners, landscape architects, engineers, and we know that the RFP is for a master plan. We understand, and yet we do master plans with an eye towards how will this be implemented. And so we're not just, if you will, theoreticians, and with no slight meant, we're not just planners, but we're practitioners that take the plan all the way to fruition. LPA is in our 48th year, headquartered in Irvine with offices up and down California. We do work from El Centro to Redding, Lake Tahoe to Phoenix, San Diego, all over the place, Visalia, and we do them out of all of our offices. And so we like to say that our office is in California, and that's really true. We go where the need is, and we bring with us the talent to match the need. As any firm these days, we are looking to find great clients, right? So clients that we feel that we can come alongside, that can share a vision, that we can escort along the way, and that we can help deliver the project that you endeavor. So, to that end, I'd like to introduce my friends here, and I will embarrass them both. That's what friends do. To my right is Rick D'Amato, and he's the design principal, if you will. And Rick and I have worked together, I believe, 25 years.
Almost 26.
Almost 26, but who's counting? And Rick and I have done probably 12 civic centers, 15 libraries, 6 police facilities. We've just done a lot of work together, and I think worked well in the process. What I can tell you about Rick is, in terms of the master planning process, what he does is listen to the clients, to the history, to the site, to the climate, and is very adept at weaving that all into the narrative. Almost to the point, literally, where you can walk through the timelines at Temecula Library, where you can walk around the timelines at Brentwood City Hall, And a visitor or a fourth grader can find out where he or she is in the world. What has gone on before him or her in this place, in this town. And so books can tell stories almost as well as teachers. Buildings can tell stories almost as well as professors. And so what we offer as part of this master plan and the fruition of the project is an opportunity to tell the story of the town of Atherton in full sight for the people who are curious enough to read it. So not only does Rick do that, but in weaving and listening to the city, the stakeholders, the citizens, what he with LPA is adept at doing is providing new buildings that look familiar. And that's really interesting, because we are in an old building here. To replicate this aesthetic brings along some challenges with the new energy codes and the like. And so I know you guys have talked about this for a great length of time in the task force. But what we want to do is come alongside and design buildings, new buildings that function in today's needs, but somehow look familiar to the collective recollection of the community. So Rick does that exceedingly well. The other folks in the LPA team, Kevin Sullivan is our landscape principal, will help in building in community outreach with Rick. Rick and I as architects, we look at the built form. Kevin looks at the grown form. So we look at things differently, and so he brings his viewpoint to the conversation, and will most likely be working on the site walk investigation with the community, given the opportunity. Jeremy Hart is the project manager. You'll see him kind of behind the scenes, working on the schedules, the meeting minutes, and codifying all the decisions that are made along the way. I would be oversight on the overall project from beginning to end. If we can go to the next one. What's interesting here, and we're kind of scribbling outside your lines, forgive us, but we have with us today a friend of mine, Frank Martinez from Griffin Structures. Griffin and LPA have done work together for 20 years. And so in our proposal, we have Griffin as microprogramming and 3P delivery strategies. And it's an optional, but we just thought in reading the material, you might be interested, it might be another arrow in your quiver, to talk about different opportunities of project delivery methods. And fundraising, both in 3P, nonprofit, working with donors. And so, should we have time and should you have desire to ask questions related to that, we've brought Frank with us as well. Capped with the other consultants on our team, LSA to do the environmental checklist, the civil engineer, forgive me, BKF, that we work with on Brentwood, as well as Cummings cost estimates that we work with almost exclusively with our overall projects. And with that, I give you my friend Rick Diamano.
One of the things that a lot of people like to talk about with regard to architectural projects is what are the challenges? What are the challenges that are involved in designing this site or this building or what have you? And I don't like to really look at projects as having challenges or sites as having challenges. It always makes me very uncomfortable because I think challenges are really the opportunities of design. That's what makes a great building. And so in that sense, I always look at those, what most people would call challenges, as those opportunities or those stepping stones to a really great design. And here, even when we started to look at things that might be challenging, hate that word again, I think they're really starting to give us clues as to how the building could be designed. Again, I think the major influence we get, though, is from the community, is from the staff, to really direct us in how the building should look, feel, function. Because candidly, we're not from this area. You all live here, you work here, this is your building, and we need to take direction from you and really let that be our framework for the design of the building. So I think one thing that Jim just mentioned was the fact that what we really hold in high regard is the ability to listen and then translate that into a design.
But we're talking about the master plan, not the building.
Oh yeah, it's
So,
all very relevant.
It'd be good if you could stick to that.
No, it's all very, very relevant though. The master plan is much a part. As Jim mentioned, that's going to begin the whole framework for everything else that has to come into play. So we started the very first aspect of the master plan to really start thinking about the design of the building as well. I mean, really, when you get down to it, you don't want to have a master plan that doesn't function eventually. You have to be constantly cognizant of what comes next. So we take that master plan very seriously as a framework for design and architecture. So there are things like the adjacent train tracks, but that starts to tell us about how we potentially start to site the buildings, how the buildings face, what the buildings might potentially be made out of. The linear configuration of the site, now I think that opens huge windows of opportunities for us with regard to master planning and how the buildings are organized on the site. It starts lending us opportunities for things like arcades, for interesting roof forms, for more intimate scale buildings. This isn't a big kind of central building element. These can be buildings that are strung out along a linear path that are joined by arcades, things like that. I think you start to see that the constraints of the site start to give us opportunities. Proximity to residents, we'll start talking about scale of the buildings in relationship to what's around it, how we start to see those buildings relate to what's directly over the fence. And the increased density while maintaining the whole specific identity of what Atherton's all about. Again, that starts to talk to us about scale, about context, about the environment, how we start to handle the climate and things like that, even as far back as the master plan. We talked about the gifts of the site. One thing I love to work with, as Jim mentioned, is history and narratives. But again, that really comes from our client and how those need to be interpreted. There's nothing more of a slippery slope than trying to integrate history into a building because everybody has a different interpretation of how things happen. So we take our cue from the community, from historical societies. You've got some great organizations here, which I've listed that I see that as a definite gift to the site. So I see input as being a tremendous gift to what we do. There's nothing worse than an architect, a landscape architect, or anything with a blank sheet of paper. I think the more constraints we have, the more guidelines we have, the better the building becomes. Because we're challenged more to design something that I think is going to be more meaningful. The scenic routes as opposed to thoroughfares. Just driving around Atherton today, I realized it's really not about getting from point A to point B. It's about that journey in between. And I think that's something that can really be reflected in a master plan for something like a civic center. It's not about, I need to get from that building to that building, let me take the shortest route possible. It's about, what is that journey? What's happening along the way? What happens in those buildings? What happens in those open spaces and those spaces in between? The intimate scale, I think, is going to be a wonderful attribute to this project. We're currently working on a master plan for the city of Lake Forest for a very similar project. It's police facility, community center, and city hall. And it's within a residential environment, of course, very different aesthetically from what's going on here in Atherton. But a lot of the same attitudes towards, let's not take this city hall and make it look like a city hall. This has to fit in comfortably with these residences. It has to fit in comfortably with our environment. So we're taking a very, very different approach to that, utilizing very distinct roof forms, very low profiles. The buildings all revolve around wonderful open spaces that can be used for community events and functions. There's a large historical component. So all of that is weaved into the master plan of the project. And again, we're still just in the master plan phase of that, but we're taking that all into account as we head down the road for design. And then the climate is huge, how we start handling that with the master plan. How are these buildings joined together? How are those open spaces actually joined with those buildings itself? But again, then all of the organizations that have input on this, I think, are going to be a tremendous asset to us as we begin the master plan process. As Jim mentioned, we've done several similar types of facilities all throughout the state. All very, very different because they're all in very different places, but all have very similar components. For Brentwood, which Jim mentioned earlier, it was a city hall, a community center, a library, a parking structure, and they're all revolved around a city park. We're going to look at a little bit more detail of that later on. For all the other ones here, they are all various combinations of civic center complexes, all for the most part involving a city hall, and then there were some, I think we put the Orange Library on there, was a library and history center, but all had components that you're dealing with here in the city of Atherton, or the town of Atherton, excuse me. Strictly city halls that you see here, these are all the different city halls we've created throughout the state. Actually, I think this isn't a full list of them. But all various scales, various sizes, from anywhere from 15,000 square foot remodels all the way up to 55,000 square foot full service city halls, one-stop shop type of facilities. Libraries, which is really my passion. I love to design libraries because, as Jim mentioned, the ability for a building to tell a story, I think, is most evident in a library. And we try to make all of our public buildings actually tell stories. From the minute you walk on the site, the minute you drive on the site, that building should tell a story about the community with which it serves. And we think that's an important and integral element for civic facilities and buildings. Police and public safety, again, we've done all ranges and scales from 5,000 square foot holding facilities all the way up to 65,000 square foot LEED certified type 1 police facilities, all throughout the state again. We've actually just had the opportunity to design one of the first drive-through shooting ranges in the state of California, which was actually a lot of fun, where the cops can actually get out and practice actually driving into the facility and shooting within a shooting range. It was really wild. So we've done the whole gamut on things like that. Point Park. It's really wild. If you're ever down there, we'd love to take you on a tour of that.
I'll come.
And we actually did that with my friends. It's really a wild facility. We'd like to talk a little bit more in detail about the Brentwood Civic Center, which just completed about a year ago. It's really a unique project in that we were brought on after the documentation had already been done on a previous City Hall design. And right at the last minute, right where they were about to pull the trigger on construction, the council decided to take a gut check on the project and see if everyone was liking it, if everyone was on board, and they weren't feeling very comfortable with the way the project had been designed. So what they did is they decided to see what would happen if they brought in us who won second, right? On that one. We were actually the second place winner in the interview process. So they said, let's bring LPA in and just talk to them about the project and what their process would be. And it was very casual. We sat around a conference table. We didn't have any handouts. We had nothing, and they just wanted to have a dialogue. And so it was very similar to this. So we just told them basically what our process would be. And unfortunately, the community as well as city staff were very gun shy around architects because they felt they had been pushed into a certain direction with their city hall. So we came in for the very first community meeting, and we told them we thought that we needed to get started with the community and mending those fences right away. So we had a community meeting, and I'll never forget this because it started out very angry. there was a lot of tension in the room. So we got up there and we just had a site aerial on, and we just started to talk about the community. And we started to ask them about where they were from, how long they lived in the community. A lot of people in Brentwood had grown up there. So we just started getting stories, and they were wonderful stories about the community. And we started realizing that the former design really had nothing to do with these narratives and these stories that we were hearing. And it was up to us to really figure out how to start to weave these narratives into the whole storyline. So we had 2 complete community workshops before we ever started showing anything. They were just our method to actually sit down and listen to the people of the community and really figure out how the building should be designed. And what was really great is we started talking about, well, what do you think the building should look like? And no one really had a definitive answer for us as far as what the building should be. And then one lone person, I'll never forget, she was in the back of the room, she held up a picture and she goes, this is what this building should look like. And she brought a picture in of the old Brentwood Hotel that had been destroyed in 1971, originally built at the turn of the century, then it burnt down, then it was rebuilt. And there was such an affection for that building and what it meant to everybody's lives that they thought if it could embody what that building was about. And of course it was a 2-story hotel, very small scale. They were looking at building city hall, library, community center, parking structure all around the city park, so very different scale. There's how do we relate to that? And I think we really did a really great job sort of capturing the spirit of that building. It's like, as Jim mentioned, using elements and familiar forms to the community. But it all began in the whole community workshop process. And it was about really listening to the community and understanding what they wanted and being able to translate that. And I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but we've had tons of experience with community workshops, both public and private entities, where we've really mastered that whole process. And no 2 community workshops are alike as far as we're concerned, because you really have to understand how the community functions to understand how the community workshop should be led. Some of them are very interactive, some of them are more of a dialogue. As Jim mentioned, doing a site walk, we did an amazing site walk at Brentwood where we went through the site area for the city hall and the community center, through the city park. We started to identify just visually, what we thought as we moved around the site, where buildings should be placed, how they should relate to each other, what trees needed to be saved and integrated into the design of the project. So it was all about that from very early on in the master plan process. So this was the final site plan for the Brentwood project. The park actually existed from, the late 1800s, and had gone through several iterations. It had kind of gone through some years of not being used as appropriately as it should have been. It was right next to a high school, so a lot of high school kids would hang out there, which is fine. but it wasn't really appreciated for the real central part that it should be to the community. So our concept was to really bring it back to what it was once for the community, and take the buildings and start to ring them around the park. And this idea actually came from one of the community members. Because as architects, we say, oh, we want those buildings right on the street. We want everybody to notice what we're doing. But Peter said, you know what? No, let's let the park take place center stage in this. So the buildings were pushed back and they rung around the park, which really, again, started opening up opportunities for us. There's an amazing arcade which rings the entire park, which became, as Jim mentioned before, a history lesson. We use these large-scale plaques, which you'll see in just a moment, that we actually designed, that take you through the entire timeline for the city of Brentwood and for the outlying areas. And it became this wonderful event space for the city as well. I'll show you some photographs of this as we go through. This was actually the beginning of the timeline, which was just outside the council chambers, and it began with this fountain, and it started talking about the incorporation of Brentwood. The fountain was actually designed through our offices with some local artists that we brought in. We had a local artist competition, and they were brought on to do the tile mural as well as some other elements within the park. But this was something that was developed very early on in the master plan, that this would be the beginning of that timeline, and this would be the beginning of the story of Brentwood. So it was developed, as I said, throughout the process, and it became this fountain element, which is really quite beautiful. The building itself, as I mentioned, was based on the design of the historic Hotel Brentwood, which unfortunately no longer existed. But all the elements, the detailing that you see there, all was directly a result of the photographs that we found on the Hotel Brentwood, and it was brought and recreated for this particular building. These are just some individual shots. I know we don't have much time here, so I want to get through this rather quickly, but you can see the arcade feature, which is right there. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. The arcade feature, which is right here, which housed all the different timeline plaques as you walked through it, and provided views out to the park. We created the park in-house with Kevin, as a matter of fact, leading the helm on the design of the park. It was a wonderful children's park that became an aspect of this, which opened up right off the street, that had a water park involved in it. So it was really a year-round park for the residences. There's an amazing area, can't really see it here, where we created a lawn for outdoor concerts. They have an annual corn fest where they have a giant festival for when they harvest the corn, which is really wonderful. And I was nominated the honorary king of the corn fest, which was quite, it was quite an honor.
You're a bit corny.
Yeah, exactly. But it was really a wonderful experience for us, and we take that experience now, we learn from it, and we bring that to other communities. We currently just completed a city hall and police facility for the city of Laguna Niguel, where we had a whole different approach to their community meetings. What we did there is we had what did we call them? I can't remember what we called them, not too long ago, but we had the community come in and we had all different options and schemes and different things that had been developed with staff all around the room. And we had positions around the room where the community come up and interact with interior designers, landscape architects, architects, and they were all around the room answering questions, and it was really wonderful and interactive. And then we all got together in just one big dialogue at the end, because they wanted to do it in 2 meetings. So we had to have, what typically takes 4 to 5 meetings, we actually did it in 2 meetings. But I think we got enough of the information from the community to actually go out and design the building, and it's actually become very successful. We have more images of that if you want to see them as well. So now, that actually sort of ends our presentation, but we're here to answer any questions you may have. We have additional images to show you in case you're interested in seeing those, in an effort to answer your questions.
These are just triggers that
Right.
if questions come up, we push the button and there's
And we
more
can go
images
to
to talk
some
to.
additional, there, it's
So-
actually working.
We have a very interactive committee, and
Please,
so it's going to be
wonderful, good.
free-form, so just speak up.
Okay, so I have 2 questions for you guys. One is, you just gave a lovely discussion about public outreach. I didn't see it in your proposal. What I saw your proposal was item 13, based on public input and city council decisions, prepare a master plan, but I didn't see anything about the public prior to that, in that timeline. I saw talking to this committee, I didn't see anything prior to that. And then although I saw, I have 3 public meetings, one with residents, one with us, and one with council. So to me, that didn't reflect the process we want to have.
Yeah.
I just wanted to
Would-
get
would-
your reaction. Question 2 is, I won't get a chance to ask you again. Go to the next person. Question 2 is, who are we going to be working with? Is it Kevin? Is it going to be you, Jim? Who's going to be, who are we actually going to be spending our time with? Who's that team that's going to come to ATHERTON many times, and they're going to roll up their sleeves and really work on it?
That'd be me and Kevin, and for the most part, Jim as well.
Yeah, Kevin is, he is in northern Washington attending a family mission. Very, and all I can do is tell you he's a very outgoing, professional, personable individual that just loves landscape architecture and loves doing public outreach. School with Lawrence Halpern, and is very adept at listening and weaving those in. I see Kevin and Rick being your primary people in the outreach. In terms of responding, I had some of the similar concerns, but for better or for worse, I parroted back the exact questions that were asked in the RFP and tried to weave in the hours that individuals would spend on each one of those tasks. So clearly woven in there are the workshops that you consider important and that we would really place those in the right time of the calendar. The calendar is also challenging in the fact that it is happening over the summer, and we are concerned about people being present to have public input. And so we need to, I would suggest that we would need to have other means for people who perhaps aren't in town to be able to chime in virtually and or electronically to make their thoughts known if they're not able to be present at some of these workshops. Hopefully that answers your question.
Maybe a better way, what process do you recommend for a project like this? Maybe
As
that's
far as the actual structuring of the meetings,
public outreach.
I think from what I just gathered in just the short time we've been able to be here, I see this as being a very interactive process. I would love to see a site walk where we get the community out there and we walk the site and we find out what's precious, where buildings should be, where open space should be, how the relationships should be strived between the neighboring residences. I think all that's going to be huge, and I think the only way to do that is actually get out on the site. It's really difficult to kind of look at an aerial, especially when you're not familiar with an area, and really understand the site properly. You really need to be there and be on site. This isn't an urban area, it's a very rural area, very scenic area, and it's all going to be about how we experience the site. And I would love to do that with the actual residences, with the staff that's going to be working in the building. I think it's going to be very important to understand it firsthand before we even start talking about a master plan.
And yet our concerns, we've read through all the Blue Ribbon Task Force. We acknowledge a lot of people here and others that have put in a great quantity of hours. I would ask the question, is anyone concerned with resident fatigue or outreach fatigue? And yet, it's a new program. The library has come to town. And so it's pretty much with the capacity, with the information that we have that can be moved forward, square footage, site constraints, all that we bring in that new element of library. Maybe we review what has been done before, but candidly, it's a new program. And the library affords that, and might be a great opportunity to start anew. And that's, you've asked the question, it's hard not to start anew with a brand new program like that.
Jen?
Well, given that line, if the public is apathetic, do you have any alternative messages, Joe?
We've dealt with that before too. It is difficult to engage a community that is apathetic. Is that the case in Atherton right now?
We've
Is it?
coined a new term, the AAA. We're AAA. For the AAA community. And the concept of holding a one large community site walk is probably not going to be that well attended. The community, is, unless there's something to really look and see at and be against or be controversial, they don't really want to show up. And they're very busy people. So one of the thoughts is, to go into their community. We want to make them a triple E community. And what was that? Enthusiastic, engaged, and Energetic?
Energetic.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Empowered, no, empowered.
we recently completed the city hall and library for the city of Malibu,
Yeah?
and that's a pretty apathetic community when it comes to their city hall. And what we did there, which is very, and I'm really glad to hear this, because see, it just shows that as an outsider, we don't know exactly what's
No,
going on. So
clearly.
we have to really start to think about how we're gonna start to structure this process. And with Malibu, what we did is we started very, very early on in the process with advertising. And we started working with the local papers and things like that, with going to the schools, and starting to actually go out and seek opinions rather than waiting for them to come to us. We did the same thing with the city of Orange, where we actually went and started to engage women's clubs, we went to schools, we went to places like that, because they weren't necessarily coming to us and giving their opinions, so we went out and got the opinions. And it's amazing, because certain local clubs, you have a lot of, like I showed you, major organizations that I think would be open to, you know, having a half-an-hour discussion on what the civic center could be, or the library could be. I might be wrong on that too, but I think there's an opportunity for us to go get the information if it's not going to be coming to us. I think we definitely need to get that input so that we can engender the community to the project and get them to be enthusiastic with the 3 E's, as you put it.
And I think we can utilize technology really well with computer-aided fly-throughs and put them on the webpage, streamline, and walk them through. It's not like being there, but it's pretty close. So, you know, the other side of the pendulum slides over and says, you guys know this project better than anybody. Why don't we just go ahead with you all? And yet, that's not gonna work either. So it's kind of like, yeah, okay, we need the input.
Fortunately, everybody in Atherton thinks alike. There's never any dissension.
No,
one way.
right. We are in one accord, aren't
So let's just draw it up now.
Yeah.
you? So I think you have a question.
I have.
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
You know, it's wonderful to hear all the great things you've done. And I'm sure that you're very, very proud of them, but I would have liked to have had a little bit, even though you've got a lot of stuff in your book here, a little bit about how do you get this project done? I mean, you haven't talked one little bit about that. And, you know, when you get started, what are the first things you're going to do? I mean, I know it's all in here in writing, but it would be good if you could give us a better flavor of, you know, I'm very familiar with Southern California. I know a lot of the buildings that you've been involved with there, and I'm sure they're all wonderful, but we're really interested in our master plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
None of
all
those,
these other things.
none of those buildings in Southern California mean anything to you. Who can give a rip? I get it. But to go through the process, to simplify a long process, and this, forgive me, you've heard this before, but you've asked the question, is to understand the constraints and opportunities. You're requiring us to dig deep into the material that you have to find out where are the lines that we can play within? What are the boundaries that we can work within? Where's the underground easements, the storm lines, where are the overhead power lines, the easement, all the things that says you can't play over here unless you're willing to spend a lot of money.
So let me just interrupt. Let's assume we decide that you're the guys that are going to get this contract. So you get a letter saying you've been selected. How long does it take you to get up here after you get that letter to get started?
I can be here the next day.
The next day?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll have your 2 people that you talked about up here.
Yep.
And so they arrive at the airport, they come up here. What are the first things that you?
I want to meet with the Public Works Director to find out access to all the technical information that I was just describing that allows us to understand where we can plan, where we can't plan. That's step 1. Step 2 is to cull through all the information and work with staff and CCAC to find out the updated program information, the desires of the city staff and the CCAC. It might reflect the findings in the Blue Ribbon Task Force summary of 2009. It might be somewhat augmented with the input from the library after it went down last November. We need the programmatic information. So we have the playground and we have the play elements that we need to pull together. Then we start working with the city in refining this outreach program that we feel can be successful with all the idiosyncrasies of the community, to engage with them and make sure that they have opportunity and access to give their input into the process. At that point, we start sculpting the 3 different master plans and giving those to the community for their input. Love it, hate it, ambivalent about it. And then we work those again. We come back to the community. We come back to the CCAC for more input. And then we either take all 3 or we take one, depending on the direction, to the city council for their review. It's all master plan oriented. We have cost estimators involved. We've got technical information involved, and we have the environmental checklist for that gives us the steps for our next.
So you have more than one alternative.
Excuse me?
3 alternatives, he said.
Oh,
Yeah, more than one.
More than one alternative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Blue Ribbon Task, I happen to be on the Blue Ribbon Task Force, but there's been a lot of changes since then. They've laid off half the employees, and so, you know, there's a lot of things that are different. It's probably good to read, but.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Town Center Task Force that took up from the 2000.
There's another, we've had
Yeah.
several task forces.
So, yeah, we have some more current information.
Clearly, you all have been living it.
Yeah.
We're just reading the cliff notes.
Right, exactly. Any other members of the team here? Clyde?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on one of the earlier questions. Rick, you indicated that you'd be very involved in the project, but you kindly submitted this work plan, and I'm not sure if it's completely accurate, but what it's showing is that your hours are 138 hours, which is less than 10% of the total hours that you estimate for the project. So it doesn't seem like a lot of involvement. And then there was another question, there was also a follow-up in regards to the meetings that you would have with the town residents. And you indicated there that your first meeting would be in November. So it sounds like what you submitted here is really almost a placeholder, and you intend to like revisit